There's a moment that almost nobody talks about. Not the moment the narcissist leaves, not the screaming fights, not the cold silences, not even the betrayal. The real moment, the dangerous moment, is the one that comes after. The moment they look at you and realize you're no longer breakable. And if you've lived through this, you know exactly what I mean. Something in you changed, quietly. You stopped explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped defending your intentions to a person who twisted every word into a weapon. You stopped panicking every time their tone changed. You stopped chasing closure that was never coming. And for the first time in a very long time, your nervous system became still. Not healed completely, not untouched by grief, but different, steadier. And that is the moment the narcissist becomes truly dangerous. Because narcissists can tolerate your pain. They can tolerate your confusion. They can tolerate your tears, your anxiety, even your anger. What they cannot tolerate is your emotional independence. The moment they realize they can no longer reach inside your mind and rearrange your reality, panic begins. Not visible panic. You won't always see it on their face. But internally, something starts collapsing. Because the entire relationship was built on one unspoken assumption, that no matter how badly they treated you, you would remain emotionally available to them. That you would keep reacting, keep doubting yourself, keep needing their validation, keep orbiting their approval like your survival depended on it. And when that stops, when your silence becomes genuine, when your distance becomes peaceful, when your absence no longer feels like a performance but a decision, the narcissist experiences something they rarely experience: loss of control. And that loss hits them deeper than love ever did. See, most people misunderstand narcissists. They think narcissists are obsessed with power because they enjoy dominance. That's only half true. The deeper truth is far darker. Control is how they regulate themselves. Your reactions stabilized their ego. Your attention fed their identity. Your emotional dependence reassured them that they mattered. You were never just a partner to them. You were psychological supply. And supply is not supposed to leave. Supply is supposed to stay attached, accessible, reachable, reactive. But now something terrifying has happened. You've become calm. You answer differently now. Or maybe you don't answer at all. The emotional hooks that used to pull you back no longer work the same way. The guilt stops landing. The manipulation becomes visible. The hot and cold games start looking childish instead of powerful. And the narcissist notices every single bit of it. Do not underestimate how closely they study your emotional shifts. A narcissist may ignore your humanity, but they monitor your attention with terrifying precision. They notice the delay in your replies, the lack of emotional urgency in your voice, the absence of desperation. They notice when you stop trying to prove your worth, and that is when the final strategy begins. Not the loud strategy, the intelligent one. Because by this point, rage no longer works on you. Gaslighting no longer works on you. Punishment no longer works on you. So they evolve. And what they do next catches people off guard all the time. Because the final trick does not arrive looking evil. It arrives looking like growth. Suddenly, they seem calmer, softer, self-aware. They begin saying things you begged to hear for years. I finally understand what I put you through. You didn't deserve that. I've been working on myself. I know I hurt you. And when they say it, something inside you freezes. Because this is the version of them you waited for. The version you cried for, prayed for, destroyed yourself hoping to reach. And now suddenly, here it is. But listen carefully to me now. This is the most psychologically dangerous stage of the entire cycle. Because the narcissist has finally understood something critical. They cannot control you through pain anymore. So now they will try to control you through hope. Hope is far more powerful than fear. Fear exhausts people eventually. But hope? Hope keeps people emotionally attached for years. And narcissists know this instinctively. That is why the final phase feels so confusing. Because it no longer looks like abuse. It looks like healing. They become patient in ways they never were before. Careful with their words. Emotionally intelligent almost overnight. They start using the language you always wished they understood. Boundaries, accountability, trauma, communication, growth. And if you are not deeply grounded in your own clarity, this will pull you back in with terrifying force. Because it feels real. That's the part nobody prepares you for. It doesn't feel fake. It feels like the miracle you waited years for. And the reason it feels so convincing is because the narcissist has been studying you this entire time. They know exactly what finally broke you, exactly what you needed but never received, exactly which emotional wounds still ache beneath your strength. They know the words that disarm you, the tone that softens you, the tiny look in their eyes that makes you remember the beginning instead of the ending. People assume manipulation always looks cruel. No, the most dangerous manipulation often looks like love finally arriving late. And that is why intelligent people go back, not because they are weak, not because they are foolish, but because human beings are emotionally wired to move toward repair, especially when they spent years starving for it. The narcissist understands this, so they create an emotional environment designed to reactivate your deepest longing. Suddenly, they become consistent for a few weeks, attentive, warm, present. The chaos disappears just long enough for your nervous system to unclench. And once your guard lowers, the psychological rewriting begins. Very subtly at first. They'll say things like, "I'm trying so hard now. You're still punishing me for the past. I can't keep paying forever for my mistakes." And notice what's happening there. The focus quietly shifts. At first, they were the one taking accountability. Now suddenly, your pain becomes the problem. Your caution becomes holding on to negativity. Your boundaries become walls. Your self-protection becomes fear of vulnerability. This is the pivot. This is where the mask starts slipping. Because genuine accountability does not pressure you to heal on someone else's timeline. Real change understands hesitation. Manipulation resents it. And if you watch closely, you'll notice something chilling. The narcissist's growth often lasts only as long as it takes to regain emotional access to you. Once they feel you softening, once they feel your empathy reopening, the old behaviors begin leaking back through the cracks. A dismissive comment here, a guilt trip there, a subtle twist of reality during an argument. Small enough to question, small enough to excuse, but familiar enough to make your stomach tighten. Your body notices before your mind does. That anxiety you thought had disappeared? It returns quietly. You start over-explaining again, monitoring their moods again, editing your tone again. And the most dangerous part? You start doubting your own perception again. Because now the narcissist has something new to weaponize, their transformation. Now, if you react to mistreatment, they can say, "See, I've changed, but you haven't." And that sentence destroys people, because it targets the exact thing survivors work hardest to rebuild: trust in themselves. This is why the final trick is so devastating psychologically. It doesn't attack your weakness. It attacks your healing. The narcissist studies your growth, then adapts their manipulation to fit the stronger version of you. If guilt no longer controls you, they use empathy. If fear no longer controls you, they use vulnerability. If chaos no longer controls you, they use hope. The method changes. The objective never does: regaining emotional control. And the hardest part to accept is this: some narcissists truly believe their performance is real while they are performing it. For a moment, they may genuinely convince themselves they've changed. But real transformation requires something narcissism fights against at its core: sustained self-awareness without self-protection. And eventually, maintaining the mask becomes exhausting, because masks always are. A performance can create intensity. It cannot create consistency. That's why the truth always leaks eventually, not all at once, in flashes, tiny moments where the real dynamic reappears beneath the polished surface. A coldness in their eyes when you say no, an irritation when your boundaries inconvenience them, a subtle punishment when you stop centering their emotions. And if you ignore those moments, you will slowly begin abandoning yourself all over again. That is how the cycle restarts, not through one dramatic collapse, but through tiny self-betrayals repeated quietly over time. You ignore the comment that hurt you. You excuse the manipulation because they're trying. You silence your intuition to protect the possibility of the future you wanted. And slowly, almost invisibly, you begin shrinking again. This is why survivors often say, "I lost myself without realizing it," because narcissistic control rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually, like fog filling a room. So slowly, you don't notice you can't see clearly anymore. And the narcissist depends on that gradualness. They depend on your empathy overriding your instincts. They depend on your ability to understand them becoming stronger than your ability to protect yourself. Because your compassion was always the doorway. That's what made you valuable to them in the first place. You loved deeply. You forgave deeply. You tried deeply. And those are beautiful qualities in the presence of healthy love. But in the hands of someone who views intimacy as leverage, those qualities become weapons against you. This is the part that changes everything once you finally understand it. The narcissist does not experience love the way you do. They experience access. Access to your attention. Access to your emotions. Access to your reassurance. Access to your nervous system. That's why they become destabilized when you emotionally detach. Because your detachment forces them into something they spend their entire lives avoiding, themselves. Without your reactions to regulate them, without your admiration to inflate them, without your emotional labor to stabilize them, they are left alone with the emptiness underneath the performance. And that emptiness terrifies them. Most people think narcissists have high self-esteem. Actually, many narcissists have something far more fragile: conditional self-worth held together by external validation. That's why your strength affects them so deeply. Not because you became cruel, not because you won, but because your healing exposed something they desperately wanted to deny, that they no longer have power over your identity. And once a narcissist feels that power slipping permanently, desperation begins entering the system. That's when the manipulation can become strangely emotional. You may suddenly hear things like, "You're abandoning me. No one understands me like you do. I'll never love anyone the way I loved you." And for a moment, it hits you. Because part of you still remembers their pain. Part of you still sees the wounded human beneath the dysfunction. And that's what makes this so psychologically complicated. You are not heartless. You are not incapable of empathy. You can understand someone's suffering and still recognize they are unsafe for you. Read that again internally. You can understand someone's suffering and still recognize they are unsafe for you. That realization changes everything, because many survivors stay trapped for years believing compassion requires self-sacrifice. It does not. Love without safety becomes self-destruction, and eventually, every survivor reaches a moment where they must choose between two realities: the fantasy of who the narcissist could become, or the evidence of who they consistently are. That choice hurts, because letting go of the narcissist often means letting go of the future you imagined, the marriage you pictured, the peace you hoped for, the version of them that appeared during those rare, beautiful moments. And those moments were real to you. That's important. You were not imagining your love. You were not foolish for believing in potential. But potential is not the same thing as pattern. And one of the most painful forms of maturity is learning that someone can genuinely love parts of you while still being incapable of loving you safely. That contradiction breaks people emotionally, because humans naturally search for consistency. We want people to be either good or bad, safe or dangerous, loving or cruel. But narcissistic relationships often swing violently between emotional extremes. That inconsistency creates trauma bonds, not because you're weak, but because intermittent reinforcement is psychologically addictive. The brain becomes attached to relief. The rare moments of affection feel euphoric precisely because they arrive after pain. And over time, your nervous system starts confusing emotional volatility with emotional significance. That's why calm, healthy love can initially feel boring after narcissistic abuse. Your body became conditioned to chaos, conditioned to emotional unpredictability. conditioned to earning love instead of receiving it naturally. And healing means breaking that conditioning, not just intellectually, physiologically, emotionally, spiritually. You have to teach your body that peace is not emptiness, that safety is not weakness, that consistency is not lack of passion. And the narcissist's final trick is designed to interrupt that healing before it fully solidifies. Because once your nervous system truly reconnects with peace, you become unreachable to manipulation in a way they cannot tolerate. And this is the part narcissists fear most. Not your anger, not your words, not even your absence. They fear your indifference. Because anger still contains emotional attachment. Pain still contains emotional attachment. Even hatred still contains emotional attachment. But indifference? Indifference means the psychological cord has finally been cut. It means your emotional world no longer revolves around them. And when that happens, the narcissist loses the thing they valued most: influence. That's why many narcissists return right when you finally seem at peace. Not when you're broken, not when you're begging, but when you're genuinely moving on, when your energy changes, when your attention shifts toward your own life again, when your laughter starts sounding real again. They feel it. People underestimate how deeply narcissists track emotional access, even from a distance. Sometimes they reappear through a random text, a vague apology, a memory, a crisis, a sudden confession, a message that says, "I just miss talking to you." Simple, soft, almost innocent. But beneath it is a question: do I still have access to your emotions? That's the real test. And if the answer is yes, the cycle can restart astonishingly fast. Because narcissistic dynamics do not rebuild from zero. They reactivate, like an old program waiting for power. The moment emotional access returns, the old structure begins rebuilding itself underneath the surface. And this is why survivors must stop romanticizing closure. Closure rarely comes from the narcissist finally understanding your pain. It comes from your decision to stop needing them to understand it. That shift is life-changing. Because as long as your healing depends on their validation, you are still psychologically tied to them. The narcissist may never fully admit what they did, never fully understand the damage, never give the apology your heart wanted. And painful as this is, healing begins when you stop making your peace dependent on that apology arriving. Because the truth is, some people would rather lose you than fully face themselves. And narcissists often fall into that category. Real accountability requires the collapse of the false self. It requires confronting shame without escaping into blame, superiority, denial, or manipulation. And many narcissists would rather destroy relationships than experience that internal collapse. So instead, they perform awareness. They imitate growth. They study emotional language like actors studying a script. And the terrifying part? They can become incredibly convincing, especially to people who still carry hope. That's why your clarity matters more than your feelings. Feelings are important, but feelings alone are not protection. Because trauma bonds create emotional contradictions. You can miss someone who damaged you. You can love someone who manipulated you. You can crave someone who was unsafe for your nervous system. Human emotions are complicated. Missing them does not mean they were healthy for you. Loving them does not mean you should return. And one of the deepest levels of healing is learning to stop treating emotional longing as evidence. Longing is not evidence. Patterns are evidence. Consistency is evidence. Behavior over time is evidence. And once you finally start seeing the relationship through patterns instead of promises, the illusion weakens. That's when something extraordinary begins happening inside you. Your energy returns. The constant hypervigilance starts fading. You stop scanning every conversation for hidden tension. You stop rehearsing imaginary arguments in your head at 2 a.m. You stop carrying responsibility for another adult's emotional instability. And little by little, you start becoming yourself again. Not the exhausted version of yourself that survived the relationship. The real version. The one that existed before confusion became your normal state. You start rediscovering things narcissistic relationships quietly stole from you. Mental clarity, spontaneity, creativity, deep sleep, the ability to relax without fear. You realize how much energy survival was costing you. And then one day, something almost surreal happens. You look back at the relationship, and instead of craving it, you finally see it clearly. Not through loneliness, not through chemistry, not through fantasy, but through truth. You see how often you abandoned your own needs to keep the peace, how often your empathy was exploited, how often you confused emotional intensity with love, and perhaps most painfully, you see how hard you worked for crumbs, tiny moments of affection that felt enormous only because deprivation made them feel rare. That realization can break your heart all over again. But this time, the heartbreak is different. This time, it wakes you up instead of pulling you under. Because now you understand something your old self could not understand yet. Love should not require the destruction of your nervous system. Real love does not leave you chronically anxious. Real love does not punish boundaries. Real love does not make you feel emotionally unsafe for being human. And once you fully experience relationships built on safety, honesty, reciprocity, and emotional consistency, the narcissist's final trick loses its power forever. Because you no longer confuse being chosen with being valued. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. And that changes everything. Not immediately. Healing rarely ends in one dramatic breakthrough. It ends quietly, in ordinary moments. The first morning you wake up and they are not the first thought in your mind. The first time your phone buzzes and your nervous system doesn't panic. The first conversation where you speak freely without calculating how someone might punish your honesty later. Tiny moments. But those tiny moments become an entirely new life. And one day you realize something almost impossible to explain to people who haven't lived through it. You are no longer surviving them. You are simply living. That is the moment the narcissist truly loses you. Not when you block them, not when you stop replying, not even when the relationship officially ends. They lose you when they stop being the center of your emotional universe. When their approval no longer defines your worth. When their moods no longer control your peace. When their presence no longer changes the temperature of your soul. That is freedom. And ironically, that freedom often reveals something devastating. The version of you they tried so hard to control was the very thing they could never become. Authentic. Because narcissists build identities designed to impress people. But healing forces you to build a self that is real. And real always becomes stronger than performed. That's why your growth unsettled them so deeply. You became someone they could no longer manipulate through shame, no longer control through fear, no longer confuse through emotional chaos. You became conscious. And conscious people are dangerous to manipulators. Because once you can truly see the game, you cannot unsee it. The old tactics stop working. The guilt stops landing. The love bombing stops intoxicating you. The silent treatment stops frightening you. You begin recognizing manipulation in real time instead of hours later, days later, years later. And that awareness changes every relationship you will ever have again. Not because you become cold, but because you become discerning. That distinction matters. Many survivors fear healing because they think it will make them less loving, less open, less trusting, less soft. But healthy healing does not harden your heart. It sharpens your boundaries. You still love deeply. You still care deeply. You still feel deeply. The difference is this. You stop offering unconditional access to people who repeatedly misuse your vulnerability. And that is wisdom, not bitterness. There is a profound difference between closing your heart and finally learning how to protect it. The narcissist never wanted that version of you. They wanted the version that doubted itself, the version that overgave, the version that confused self-sacrifice with love. Because that version was easier to control. But that person is gone now, not destroyed, transformed. And transformation is what narcissists secretly envy most. Because beneath all the performance, many narcissists remain emotionally trapped in the same unresolved wounds for decades, repeating the same cycles, creating the same destruction, running from the same emptiness. While you faced the pain directly. You sat inside grief without escaping it. You confronted your patterns. You rebuilt your identity from the ground up. That is real strength. Not domination, not emotional control, not manipulation. Real strength is the ability to suffer without losing your humanity, And you did that, even after everything. Even after the confusion, the gaslighting, the emotional exhaustion, the moments you questioned your own sanity, you survived with your capacity for love still intact. That matters more than you realize. Because the final victory over narcissistic abuse is not revenge. It is not making them regret losing you. It is not winning the breakup. It is not becoming emotionally numb. The real victory is becoming emotionally free. Free enough that their manipulation no longer defines your choices. Free enough that their approval no longer determines your value. Free enough that you no longer abandon yourself trying to be loved by someone incapable of loving you safely. That freedom changes your entire future. Because once you stop chasing emotionally unavailable people, you finally have space to receive healthy love. Love that doesn't need confusion to feel intense. Love that doesn't disappear when boundaries appear. Love that feels peaceful instead of addictive. And at first, that kind of love may feel unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable. But over time, your nervous system learns something beautiful. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And that realization closes the door forever. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity. The narcissist's final dirty trick was designed to pull you back before you fully remembered who you were. But it failed. Because somewhere beneath the trauma, beneath the longing, beneath the grief, a deeper part of you kept waking up. A quieter part, a wiser part, a part that finally understood this. Love should never require you to betray yourself to keep it. And once you truly learn that, you never go back.